Watch Dogs 2 has landed, and now fronted by lead character Marcus Holloway. Can it surpass the mediocrity of the original and its forgettable Aiden Pearce character? The original Watch Dogs was demoed at E3 2012 and looked absolutely bloody incredible. The graphics, the depth, the gameplay, the new IP all looked absolutely phenomenal. It gave a really good account of what was hopefully to come during the next gen, i.e. PS4 and Xbox One. However, when it actually came out to be released, the graphics were nowhere near as good, and even the PC version, which in theory can handle pretty much anything as long as your rig's good enough, that didn't look any good either. Well, it looked good, but nowhere near as good as the actual footage suggested, which severely hampered what Watch Dogs could have been. And in the end, the gameplay was pretty linear, and it came through to some pretty tepid reviews. Immediately you'll notice when firing up the game just how colourful the game is, certainly when compared to the depressing colour palette of the original. It draws comparisons between the Fallout 3 palette versus the Fallout 4, which is no bad thing. So Fallout 4 being super vibrant, super rich, super colourful, which personally I prefer. And it also goes some way to suggesting that Watch Dogs 2 doesn't take itself as seriously as the first, which again is probably quite a good insight. The draw distance really is impressive. The depths of San Francisco are rendered really well, especially if you're going past landmarks such as the Golden Gate Bridge. Having that go past in the distance, absolutely fantastic. The only issue I found with the graphics mainly is just the resolution, or lack thereof. Unfortunately, the hardware is now starting to show its age, and as we're only a couple of years in, but with more and more people upgrading to 4K TVs and all the rest of it, it just means that Watch Dogs 2 already looks a little bit out of its depth. But in all fairness, like the first game, Chicago versus San Francisco, the character models and explosions look absolutely fantastic. It feels like I've been playing with Vaseline smeared on my eyes, which isn't a particularly good feeling, but hopefully when the PC version is released it will save the day and means 4K playing as it should be played. Now moving on to the gameplay, this is where it becomes a bit iffy. Parallels will always be drawn to GTA and other similar sandbox games, though GTA in particular because it is the sandbox game. The story is linear with a mission by mission structure, though it does have many side missions to complete, and add to that many collectibles and sort of paint cans, clothing, unique cars, etc. You've got a lot of content to get through. Playing the game, actual story mode, took me around 25 hours to complete with only minor shenanigans in between. The actual game itself sort of close to a full day's worth of playing, which to be honest surprised me. I got a lot more out of it than I thought I would. Everything in the game is accessed through your mobile phone. Just like real life, you must install apps to get certain things. For example, you've got maps, you've got cars on demand, etc., much like the first, but you have to install the apps before that happens. Well, that only takes a few seconds and it happens in the first few minutes of the game. It's quite an interesting way of doing it, quite a sweet little parody of real life. What I did really like was the inclusion of fast travel. So instead of, if you're not one of those people that's always driving around and you get a bit bored a bit quickly, you just want to go from point A to point B without farting around in between, fast travel is present, but you don't already have to be at that location for it to activate. So you could just fast travel between areas, let's say, without actually having to be there in the first place, which I actually thought was quite nice. And if you've seen any of the game trailers, you'll know that Watch Dogs 2 features parkour-like manoeuvres, which does work out for the majority, so you can sort of vault challenges and you can do backflips off things and whatnot, but it is all contextual, so you are dependent entirely on the game working out where you are, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and whether it should be right. So you can't just press A and jump, it's contextual, so you have to run up to an object and hold the right trigger, and if it thinks you can climb it, it will. If it doesn't, then nothing will happen, you just stand there looking like an arse. Which, it works for the most part, as I say, but it's when you're trying to, you've got objects in the game that you've got to try, maneuver to stack up and jump over, and if it doesn't like the exact alignment of where you place something, then nothing will happen. You have to realign it and so on and so forth. So it's not particularly giving in that sense, but it does work when it works, as obvious as that sounds. My favourite part of the game, in fairness, is the soundtrack. The sort of mix of electronica and hipster music, I think, suits the game really well. Gives it that sort of, just that nice, approachable, youthful vibe, as opposed to the more serious game. But I will say that when you're driving around in a car, and the default station for some reason is classical FM. But you switch the radio station to whatever it is you want, and it still keeps defaulting back to classical. That's quite annoying. But again, it's little things. But certainly when you're playing missions and you hear some of the music being played, it just suits the game really, really well, and just adds another level of depth, which just makes the game more likeable and just more enjoyable to play, which is no bad thing. So in terms of actually completing the missions, they become pretty repetitive pretty quickly, i.e. playing the main story mission, you've got infiltrate this building, nullify these guards, rinse and repeat pretty much for every location, which I must be honest does get a bit samey a bit quickly. And in terms of the actual styling of the game, or let's say the mechanics, it took me a while to realise, but it is very, very, very Batman-esque. So you'll activate your botnet vision and everything goes blue and it sort of highlights the enemies, etc. Which is, if you've played Batman, it's any of the Batman games, it's remarkably similar. And then you're just meant to take out the guys as and when, using a variety of means. You can either shoot them, stealthily take them out, etc. But to be honest, I always found stealth never worked. If I quietly tried to snipe someone or something, they'd always just come running and find me anyway. So it just ended up just being a mass brawl, and brute force would win the day. And while I continue ranting about the stealthy combat side of it, I feel it just doesn't work. I mean, I purposefully bought the silenced pistol like Aiden Pierce had in the first game to try and hopefully pick people off, but it didn't work every single time. I would try and be clever and snipe, or pick someone off at a distance or close range with the silenced pistol. It would sound like I just fired off a tank, and the guards would swarm, and that was the end of that approach. And to be honest, normally resulted in death, which wasn't particularly interesting or fun. However, once you realise that doesn't work and you start to go in all guns blazing, then it's slightly more interesting. And just bear in mind the stealth doesn't necessarily work. That being said, you are equipped with a quadcopter and a little remote control car, which are great fun. You use those to recon missions, and they are tremendous fun. Surveying areas with the quadcopter is great because you can fly, which is no bad thing. And it does shoehorn it in a bit. I mean, there are areas where you have to use the quadcopter, and there are areas where you have to use the RC car. But it's still really, really good fun, though it does get repetitive pretty quickly. And what you want to do if you are playing the game, you want to get you want to upgrade as quickly as possible to get as many stats and your rewards, etc. to the highest level as soon as possible. Now, it wouldn't be a Ubisoft game if there weren't a plethora of bugs to whine about. The Division. And Watch Dogs 2 is no exception. I've had issues where the subtitles will be playing on their own, even though they'll literally be fighting each other. So you'll be listening to a wall of text, as it were, and it will just be displaying the subtitles for that. But above those subtitles, it'll be a completely separate conversation, which you haven't even triggered, which is a bit disconcerting as you're trying to read both and you're not quite really sure what's happening. You don't know which way is up, really. So that's quite annoying. I did have an issue with one of the missions where you're meant to enter a lift and it will take you up to the whatever floor. That didn't happen. I got on the lift, the door shut, and that was it. I had to hard reset the Xbox to get any further with that, which was a pain in the arse. And some of the parkour issues I've had, i.e. not vaulting over objects or not jumping or not doing what exactly I thought I would be or could be doing. And lastly, I have noticed sort of a few seconds of stutter. You'll be driving along the Golden Gate Bridge or something like that and it will freeze for about 5 seconds and then carry on. But thankfully none of those are game breaking. The only game breaking glitch I've come across is the lift not opening, which other than that would have been a pretty good experience. But as I say, Ubisoft games are typically replete with bugs and glitches. They just don't seem to have the polish that other games do. But all in all, it seems a pretty robust game, in fairness, which is excellent news. Now the story is where it gets slightly confusing. It made perfect sense initially, and then the more you play, the more acronyms and companies and parodies of real life come out of the woodwork, and then you just left, well, I personally felt, what is going on? You just got names, Invite, Bloom, Bellwether, etc. And I can't remember the first game at all, so that must have been that good, but I can't remember any of the companies in that, let alone any of the companies in this one, so trying to work out who's who is just ridiculous. But of course there are parodies of real life, so for example Invite is equivalent to Facebook and so on and so forth, so it's not difficult to work it out. But by the end there are about 8 companies all fighting for, I don't know, their own individual thing. It just made it quite hard to follow. But the gist of the story is people want your data to use for their own personal gain. That's literally it. Which sounds a bit cliche. You know, it's probably not far from the truth in fairness. But it, you know, in terms of story, it's not groundbreaking. It's not revolutionary. It suits the game well, and your team of hipsters sets out to try and take down the man. But overall, yeah, I don't know, just found myself getting lost, and to be honest, I didn't really care by the end. But that's probably my own personal problems of not having an attention span longer than 30 seconds. So what's the verdict? Well, I'll tell you. I really liked the quadcopter and remote control car. I like the collectibles, the side missions, the fact San Francisco looks so good and the draw distance is so nice, and driving on the Golden Gate Bridge you feel like you're actually there to a point. The soundtrack is brilliant. The aesthetics are really, really nice. It's colourful. It's a happy game. A bit like Sunset Overdrive as well, actually, now I think about it. That sort of really, really positive colour palette. And the story was interesting, if not a little bit preachy. What I didn't like was its classic Ubisoft with the lack of polish, the AI issues, the graphics. Well, granted, this isn't going to affect your PC because the PC will look great, but certainly the Xbox One just looks out of its depth. When you're starting a mission or you're finishing a mission, it will forget the car you've got, so you could have worked your ass off to get a Ferrari or whatever, or a faux Ferrari. And you start the mission and it'll forget what you've been driving, so you'll just have to go and get another vehicle, and it's just, really, this day and age. The missions are too repetitive, and also there are too many companies to keep track of. But other than that, it's a good solid game. And my verdict, if I had to give it a number, would be about a 7 out of 10. Good, enjoyable, but no real replay value for me personally after that.